You're listening to All In. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you fulfill the mission of God in your life and around the world. I'm your host, Jeff Roper. Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of All In. Do I have a treat for you? You know, over the course of this podcast, I've given you a glimpse into the life of missionaries in the process of the early stages of deploying. They haven't gone to the field yet. Others who've been on the field for 20 years, and some who have just gotten on the field. And we're going to do an experiment. I have two guinea pigs here that have agreed to join me in the adventure of the mission of God. It's a young couple that I've had the privilege of knowing and walking with for some time now, that have said yes to God's call to reach a global city. And this Sunday, as we're recording this, it's this coming Sunday, they are announcing to their church that they will be resigning and becoming missionaries with Foursquare Missions to deploy to the city of London to help plant a church there, a church planting movement. And so I got a hold of this couple and I said, would you be open to doing this experiment? I want to give people a front row glimpse into what it really is like to tell the human story of saying yes to the mission of God. I want people to know what it's like, and just to walk with one couple through everything from announcing to their church, going through the training, all the way through the deployment process of this incredible adventure, taking a bold step of leaving behind your comforts and securities of home in order to say yes to what Jesus has called you to do. And being eager, willing guinea pigs, this couple said, sure, why not? Of course, I don't know if he actually asked his wife about this, but we'll find out. So I want you to welcome with me to the podcast, Jonathan and Sarah Griffiths. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be on here with you.
Hey, Jonathan, you and I got to know each other some time back. You were working, as well as a pastor, you were working with Foursquare Communications, and we were doing some writing projects or something together, and we developed a friendship out of that. And I've always enjoyed time with you and picking your brain and watching you in your sweet spot. And you and I were in a meeting somewhere together. So I don't remember, we were in a district conference or something, and we got to talking about London. Do you remember that conversation very well?
Yeah, actually it was last autumn time. I'd been to what was the Great Northern District Conference, and whilst I was there, I'd met Gabe Barrero, who was currently serving in church planting and assisting Dave Veach in the Northwest District. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of our transition conference, and he invited me to come up and join in Spokane. So it was at NWD 2015 in Spokane that we sat in that meeting. And I was there simply because I was following my in-laws around. They'd already arranged to go to that conference, and you shared about Europe and what's going on there, and it really resonated. And so all I was trying to do was thank you for sharing your heart. And then I've come to think of it as you just lobbed something out to see if I'd catch. Do you remember what you said? It was just one little line.
Yeah, the one about London. Would you consider going to London?
Yeah, you just said if you ever think about coming to London, let me know. And then you nonchalantly just kind of wandered off with that.
It's a gift.
I know. The problem is it's normally the gift I exercise towards people in our local church. I don't have it played on me. So, yeah, right. So that's where that started. And I came home. I told Sarah all about this wonderful new district and how excited I was that we were going to partner with the people there, and what we're doing in Nampa seems to connect. And I mentioned this hilarious comment that my buddy Jeff had made. And then we ignored it, right?
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, I mean, because Johnny's from England, we've been asked so many times by people, do you ever think you'd go back there, that kind of thing. And there have been times where we have seriously prayed about it, especially when we've gone back to see family. Mm-hmm. there's the emotional pull where you want to be near people, but we had it settled, you know.
Like the calling wasn't there, right?
The calling wasn't there. The calling was here in Nampa, where we are. So when Jonathan came home and told me about it, you know, it was just like another haha kind of thing.
Yeah, we're laughing about it now, aren't we?
We are now.
We weren't then.
It was just there was a persistence to that thought. Like it was just, it planted in there and would not leave. And so for a couple of weeks, we didn't talk about it to each other, but we were both like, couldn't stop thinking about it. And eventually I came into Johnny's office when he was working from home, and I was like, remember what that guy Jeff said to you? I can't stop thinking about that. And we were not happy about that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it's important to know that, you know, I just transitioned for the first time in my life into a full-time ministry position. I'd been the senior pastor at the church for 2 years, but we'd made a leap of faith earlier in the year, saying, okay, we're going to quit Johnny's stable, well-paying, solid IT job and focus on the mission that God has given us in Nampa. And so I'd made that jump in September of 2014, which is really, it was 2014, yeah, which had really positioned me for being able to come to Spokane as well, to do 2 conferences. So it's like we've just got going, you know. We're just finding our rhythm, and we've got our sights set on the kingdom of God in Nampa, Idaho. And then in comes this detour that really threw us, and it was the persistence of the call on it that eventually led me to sending you an email. I should have looked the email up. I know it was like a one-liner.
Yeah, it was.
I was trying to be covert.
Yes, it was quite funny because when I asked you that question about if you ever consider coming to London, let me know. There was more to it than me just turning around and walking away, because your response was an absolute, unequivocal no.
I think there was even more than that, Jeff. Didn't I just laugh in your face?
Yeah, you kind of laughed in my face.
I laughed in your face, which I didn't realize. Like, I didn't realize how significant a role you have. You're just like, you're my friend Jeff who talks to me about running shoes, right? So I laughed in your face, and I'm like, no way. And the reason that it was so sudden and so stark a reaction is I know my calling, and I've been walking in it, and it's like, this is what I do, and I'm not going to get distracted, so I try and focus. Yeah. It
was one of the more direct no's that, apart from my wife, most people don't ever tell me no quite that way. It was just so funny, which I love. I mean, it's a total British way of answering somebody. You know, you Brits are very interesting. You can be as vague as possible in so many things, and then as blunt as a bowling ball. And you said, no, I'm not interested. I'm doing exactly what God's called us to do. I know I'm in my sweet spot. Yeah. Okay, great. And then it was about 2 or 3 weeks later.
Right.
I get this email, and it says, dude, we need to talk. And that's all it said.
Right.
So then we started talking.
I figured you'd get the message. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, we had that conversation, and Sarah and I, our hearts were in a place where we're just utterly opposed on so many levels to this idea. Firstly, just we love our church. We're honored to get to serve the people that we serve, and they're just this remarkable community of people that we feel very fortunate and blessed that we get to shepherd them.
Yeah.
And we've been blessed with a great home, a great place to raise our 3 boys. You know, it's just like, things are good here. And then you're saying London, and we're going major, urban, scary, crime-ridden. You know, like, everything negative is in our minds about it. And so we're appalled at the idea, and we're telling God, like, we're communicating with the Lord, we really don't like this.
Yes.
But we just want to be obedient people. So we said, God, if this is you, you're going to have to change our hearts. That's what's going to have to happen.
And so just over time, but both of your heart, both you and Sarah, your hearts were being shaped by the Lord. And I love, Sarah, how you told the story of you were the one who initiated that first conversation with Johnny, because so many times the experience that I've had, both in my own personal life, being, especially the younger and dumber I was, the more it was this way, that I was always the one gung-ho and ready to do stuff and dragging my wife along, and she's going, wait, whoa, not because she was resistant, it was because she had wisdom. And, I had zeal, she had the wisdom. And so many times I've seen guys just get a hold of a new opportunity and go crazy. And so for Sarah, you to come in and being the one initiating that was actually, for me, a great confirmation of going, okay, this is
oh gosh,
a really work of the Spirit of God here, that God is doing something, that Johnny didn't have to try to convince you. And honey, I'll buy you a diamond ring and a first, whatever it is that you would,
tools,
mountain bikes, tools or something.
I think there's, for me, there was also this is a conversation about returning to the place I was born and raised, and there's some conflict in that. And when she shared with me this persistence, I said, me too, but I wasn't going to be the first to crack. Not in any pride, just like it would have been complicated, maybe more so emotionally, if I'd been the one raising it. But the other side of it is, I mean, I'm married to this amazing woman who hears the Lord, and it was like several key moments along the way where she's the one hearing stuff. I'm just like, okay, whatever's going on, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. But like November time, when we're in the middle of this real heartache, and we're at a worship gathering with the church, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, at this point, we're definitely praying. I think Jonathan had talked to you and was like, well, what about Birmingham? What about another place? And you were like, no, it's London. So we just really didn't like that idea, but we were praying about it, and I think we were a month or so into praying. I don't know exactly. And we were having a worship time, and I sort of got like, it wasn't like a vision or anything. It was just like this idea in my head from the Lord of a poker table and of someone with their poker chips and just pushing them all into the middle. And the word I got was all in. Which we didn't know till later was the name of your podcast.
We found your podcast later, and I called Sarah. I'm like, you'll never guess what Jeff Roper's podcast is called.
Yeah.
It was great.
So, I don't know, maybe...
the funny thing, I remember you sending me an email about that time and asking me, hey, when did you decide to name your podcast?
Right. But that word, all in, was this governing... posture for us, where we said, if it's Nampa, if it's London, if it's the jungles, whatever Jesus says, we're all in. Everything we have is going into whatever he calls us to do, and that's where we need to be.
Mm-hmm. And it was definitely a sense of submission in that. Like, for me, because we were battling against this idea of, like, okay, maybe England, but definitely not London kind of thing. And it was very much like all in wherever we're needed, wherever the Lord and our leaders over us see fit to place us, that if the Lord is taking us there, this is our lives. Like, this is what we're about. There's no plan B. There's no, no other thing to fall back on. That we're going to pursue the Lord, and we're going to pursue the things that he has called us to with everything that we have.
Yeah. And you make that decision without knowing the fine points of the contract, don't you?
Well, and honestly, I was kind of baffled for all of this time from October through to May, when we got to sit with you in Anaheim about missions, and I'm British, and this, I'm like, I couldn't fathom that, but it's like the details we'll just put to one side. And so we did some really, really super spiritual, holy things to get our hearts in line, which essentially means we watched hours of a really great documentary on stories of London. Like, it's this really cool series, and
we call
really
that research.
Yeah, it was research. We were just saying, like, Lord, you need to cause us to fall in love with this place, because we love this place. And I realized somewhere in the midst of there, I grew up in Birmingham, which is the second largest urban area of the UK.
Yeah.
I was a city boy. And so all of my apprehensions about city life were founded upon having transplanted to a smaller place, a small community in Idaho, and finding that God gave me a heart for here. And I just kind of realized, if God gave me a heart for Nampa, he can give me a heart for London. I just need him to do it.
Yeah. Now, how long, you're a British citizen. Sarah, you're a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
A little bit of the background on that. Johnny, how long have you been in the U.S.?
Coming up on 11 years in September.
So you're kind of a hybrid American-British thinker.
Yeah. I mean, a third of my life has been spent in the U.S., but it's been a third of my life where I got married, had 3 kids, learned to walk in the Lord, became a pastor. It's kind of like all the really significant stuff happened here.
So depending on your perspective, you got set up or mixed up while you were stateside, and you stole one of our beautiful citizens of America.
No. She came to the UK to pilfer me.
Oh, is that what it was? Okay.
Yeah.
Of course, I think Sarah's probably got a slightly different story than that. But how long have you guys been married?
Just coming up on 11 years.
Almost 11 years.
And how old are your kids?
We have a 7.5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old. 3 boys.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you're saying, yes, we're all in, it's not only a husband and a wife, it's not only pastor of a church. This just got set up for a future of success in this beautiful community in Idaho. You're also parents of 3 young children. And you could have moved from Nampa just a little bit further over to Boise, and it's still going to be traumatic with kids. But you're going to take them into an entirely different world. What was that like as parents, to be looking at your kids, realizing you're about to uproot them from everything they know? Sarah?
I don't know. It's hard to even articulate the range of emotions. I think for me, more than anything, the idea of moving to a city like London was terrifying for me, because I have a hard enough time getting around with them here.
Just the
what's the population of Nampa?
86,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a little bit smaller than metropolitan London.
Slightly,
because I think metropolitan London is 20 million or so, isn't it?
I think last numbers I saw were 15, but it's growing rapidly, and so you could lose Nampa, the entirety of Nampa,
in a neighborhood
in London, and statistically,
I think if you look at the M25, which was where our discussion was, the interior circle of the M25 ring road, but as you know, London, you can't tell when you've left one part of London and moved into another, because even on the other side, on the outside of the M25, it just keeps going and going.
Right.
So huge difference though. Nampa, London, huge difference. So Sarah, you were going through this whole process.
Yeah, and I mean, there have been several times where I've been like, why didn't he tell us to do this like years ago? This would have been so much easier. I like easier. It would have been easier, before children. I mean, at the time where you kind of sprung this on Johnny, we we bought like our dream house like just a year before, where we really felt like the Lord set this up. He did. But he allowed us to buy this amazing place, and we have plans for the future, and so it just led to a lot of like questioning of like, well, what?
Right.
So
right, which to some extent though, like on that side of things, like why has the Lord allowed things like this house to come into our lives, and then for what we're going into now, there's that sense of growth through sacrifice, that we've been given these things so we can give them back to the Lord for His glory. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually deeply thankful that like our church is healthy right now, and we've got this great situation, because there's nobody that can look at what we're going to do and go, oh, you're just trying to get out of Dodge.
You're looking for an upgrade.
It's like, nope, that's not it. But I think one of the most helpful things for us with regards to the kids and that struggle, I think it may have been Gabe who told us about a message from Tim Keller that he'd shared about the gospel possibilities and potentials that come from raising your children in an urban context. And because, Tim Keller has raised his family in New York City, it's like, okay, we'll listen to this guy. And we found that message and we listened to it. And that was one of those turning points of perspective and of expectation where we went, oh no, this is not a bad, dangerous, awful thing for our children. This opens up possibilities for them, different possibilities from here. It's not everyone needs to move to the urban core, but God has redemptive purpose to this. Yeah. And we were able to see it, and that, like, our hearts started to attune to those things.
So through that whole process, both of you, God gave you assurances and He gave you peace that your kids were going to be okay. Now, have you been able to talk with them at all about this? Because I know you haven't yet even disclosed to the church, and
no.
As soon as you tell your kids, you've told everybody, because it's
right. Yeah. This coming Sunday, we've got a morning worship gathering, and when that's done, we'll come home, have lunch, and tell the kids.
Yeah.
That's
and then goes and tell the church.
Here's the interesting thing that in this podcast is because we're going to be wrapping this part up in a few minutes as we unpack this fact that you are in just a few days going to be telling your kids and your congregation about this monumental change, and then next week we'll do another interview of you, and we will unpack this to say, how did it go? How did your kids handle this? What happened in the congregation? What's happening in your own heart as you start this process of having your heart wrenched from something you love so deeply? Because when you're a pastor, you love that church, you love those people, even if you're in a bad situation. I've pastored for 20-something years. There were times it was a terrible time to be a pastor.
Right.
But you never ceased loving those people, even the ones who gave you hardship and grief and criticized you and called you all sorts of strange names. So you're looking at this weekend, you've got two of the most important conversations you're going to have, with your kids and with your congregation. Tell me about that. How are you processing that? What does that feel like?
Oh gosh,
it feels awful.
It does. We're laughing because we've cried too much. I mean, genuinely, the past month, because we've started to bring in the elders and deacons of the church so that they're prepared for when the whole body knows. We've had
they know.
They know now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we felt that it would be wise to have them aware and have begun the processing of it so that they can assist with shepherding, the body.
You don't want your leadership team finding out in a public service.
No.
Right.
So we've told them, we've told our life group leaders, we're just trying to, no one handed us a playbook on how to do this. I mean, we're just like, Jesus, please help us. And then we're going with wisdom from people and things. But personally, this past month, Sarah and I have gone through more just relational tensions and difficulties than the rest of our marriage combined. And some of that is just tiredness and stress. Mm-hmm. Some of that is spiritual attack, and there's a fair amount of people who would normally be praying for us who don't know what's going on, so can't be praying for us properly, right? Some of that is just I'm young and idiotic at times still, believe it or not. But God has been so gracious to us, and I don't know, I feel like our relationship deepened through this. Like, we've got a better communication and a deeper affection and care for one another because of going through it. That to say, this week I had a moment where I told Sarah, I'm not talking very much right now, which is unusual for me. That's a key factor that something's up. And I said, it's because I really don't know how I'm doing. I'm normally very self-aware emotionally, physically, mentally. I'm just in tune with myself. And this week, there's such a pull between the joy of obedience and the heartbreak of leaving that I'm just kind of just lost internally a little bit, but aware that I need to lead us through this as a family, as a church. So I called a ministry buddy in the Northwest and just said, this is how I'm doing, and he very graciously gave me the response I wanted, which was, that sounds perfectly normal. It's going to be okay.
Good. How about you, Sarah? What's it like for you as a mom, as a wife, as a fellow leader?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as far as our kids go, I think the Lord has already kind of paved some ways where our oldest, who's 7.5, has felt like the Lord is calling him to missions. So we're like, quietly laughing to ourselves as he tells us these things, which is great. And then as far as our church body goes, we got to spend some time with Daniel Brown in April. He came and spoke at our church and really, we just spent a lot of time with him and we disclosed these things to him. And he had some very good questions for us. And one of those things was, if you're meant to go, what value do you add to Cornerstone by staying?
Good question.
It's a great question.
Yeah, you can say it's a great question until it's asked of you, and then you're like, oh, that hurts.
Because we're cool?
Yeah, like I'm going to pull out a whole list of qualifications, and I'm like, there's nothing on the list.
Right.
Yes.
Counts.
So it's a comfort to know that the Lord isn't just trying to take something away from our body. Yeah. And that's what we hope to communicate on Sunday, that God isn't going to just like take us away and sorry guys.
Yeah, whoops.
But that he has something better. Like if we're supposed to be somewhere else, there's someone who's supposed to be here. Yeah. And that the Lord is there and he's not going to leave them. And so that's good, but it's still it's hard.
Yeah. And what do you expect when you have your conversation with your kids?
I think they're going to be fine. I don't expect a lot of problems. I think, they're so young. I think that that they will process things slowly and kind of as we go and
And also, we're really excited, just as Sarah said, like we kind of get to tell David,
you have been hearing from God,
you hear the Lord, and in some specifics as well. He made another offhand comment about, can I be a missionary in California? And we're aware that there's the strong likelihood we'll have some time in California with the fellow pastor before deployment, someone who's been gracious to us, and like. Our kids have no information on this, but he's getting details. So we think if he's excited and gets it that he's a missionary too, that the younger brothers will follow.
Yeah. Yeah, and that'll be an interesting thing to watch, and knowing that the grace of God will be resting upon your entire family.
Yeah.
You know, we walked with another couple through a similar situation, and to watch how God has graced their young family to go through the whole process of relocating to a foreign country that speaks an entirely different language, an entirely different culture, and to even hear them tell the story about when they sent their one of their kids, one of their little boys, to school for the first time. He didn't speak the language. Nobody in the school spoke the language. And the grace of God that was on his life. And when he would come home, you know, I would be thinking, well, one, I would be completely distraught as a parent thinking of this situation. And then to see how when he would come home, his response and his action, you know, just showing that God's calling is on the whole family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had that couple staying with us in Athens. They were staying with Debbie and I, with their kids for a few days. And I remember just sitting down on the floor with them, or kneeling down and just looking those kids right in the eyes and say, "I am so glad you're part of our team. I am so glad you guys are missionaries serving here with us in Europe," because they really are.
Yeah.
You know, and that it's a calling on your family. Now, it may not be a permanent status for all of them. You know, we all have seasons, but God is going to prepare them for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, as you've gone through this, at this point, what would be the one or two takeaways you've had that you'd say, you know, this is something I've learned either about God or myself or this process, that you'd say this is a really critical thing here that I've learned or I've embraced?
Well, I mean, first up, when we've had conversations with people that are aware of the situation now, we've shared the story and the whole deal, and then they say, "So, will you be in England forever?" And I said, "Well, I'm kind of gun shy of that thought, really. I mean,
no.
I was operating just circumstantially on the assumption we were here for decades.
Yeah.
And so just recognizing my limits in knowledge, I can see what's around me, but I can't see the big picture of the global movement of what God's doing and the strategies that He's at work in, and just saying, I know where I am today, and I'm good with that. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do the work that's in front of me, and then I'm going to be just open. I'm going to live as an available person to the Lord, and whatever He determines, I'm good. That's what we'll do. And so part of that is then a reorganization of life to say, what do we need to strip away from this? Mm-hmm. So we're not burdened by possessions or systems that make it hard to be flexible like that. You know, how do we be agile? So that's probably the first thing. It's like, God is God, and be ready to go where He sends you. And so organize your life that way. That's been one thing for us.
That's good. I think for me, the thing that comes to mind is just holding loosely to the temporary things, but holding tightly to eternal things. And kind of in the middle of all this, with our small group, we were going through Colossians, and just that setting your mind on the things above. Mm-hmm. And it's easy sometimes to hold on to the things, that we think we have here, but they're not really ours.
Right.
And they come and go. But when we hold fast to the Lord, He doesn't come and go. He's the same.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the last thing that's really in my heart and mind, I've been joking with fellow pastors. I'm like, be careful how close you get to missions. You never know what'll happen, kind of thing. But I'm reading J.D. Greer's latest book. I think it's called Gaining from Losing, and it's about being a church that gives away and sends into missions and the whole thing. And he describes God as a whirlwind who will suck you in and then propel you outwards. Wow. And that's kind of how we feel. We've been drawn deeper into the heart and the mission of God, and it's compelling us to go. And I don't think, well, I think my sweetheart is very, 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 very special. But I don't think we're like unique people who we're the only kind of people that could be picked for this work.
Right.
Every single one of us needs to have this missions heart and experience, whether it's staying or going.
Yeah, exactly. What was the name of that book?
I think it's Gaining from Losing.
Okay.
It's by J.D. Greear.
Okay, we'll include links to that in the show notes so people can pick that up if they're interested. Yeah, because it is what you just said, very important for people to realize. In the Roper Book of Roperisms, it is written that the work of global missions is not the job of the missionary; it's the job of the body of Christ.
Yeah.
That nobody has a call to missions. Everybody has a call to missions.
There you go.
You know, that this is the assignment of the body of Christ, to participate in God's conspiracy to upright a world that has fallen over. And he's uprighting that world through Jesus Christ and his body.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our assignment.
Yep.
And, you know, I was having a conversation last night with someone, and, you know, they were talking about how they love being a supporter and stuff, and, you know, giving to us and stuff. And I said, you know, since I've stopped, I was a pastor for 20-something years. I said, now that I'm not pastoring and I'm just doing full-time mission work for these years now, I've really begun to think differently about everything that we do. You know, as a pastor, and I said to him, I said, you know, I really started questioning now, what are we doing that is bringing comfort to us? You know, what are we spending our money on that brings, as a church or as Christians, that brings comfort to us, and what are we doing that advances God's purposes? You know, and I just trying to constantly renew my mind to this thing of being caught up in the mission of God, to say that, you know, the church, I forget the guy's name now that said it, but he said, does the church have a mission, or does the mission have a church? Right. Alan Hirsch, that was the guy.
Yeah, he and Ed Stetzer, right?
And Ed Stetzer does the same. You know, and that's the thing. We find our life purpose getting caught up in the mission of God.
Yeah.
And that's what you guys have done. And you've got caught up in this mission. I love how you talked about it. It's just, you got T-boned here.
Yeah.
You know, you were going one particular direction, and wham, God T-boned you. You know, you talk to others, and it's like, yeah, I knew since I was 3 years old that this was what I was going to be called to do.
Right.
And, you know, this whole thing about God's sovereignty is amazing. When you really find that you discover this, that God is God and you're not.
Yeah.
And he will call, he will equip, he will anoint, and all we have to do is say yes.
Yeah.
And that's what you guys are doing. Well, next week we're going to interview you again to continue to unpack this story, because like I said, on Sunday you're going to talk to your kids, you're going to talk to your church, and you're going to feel a little bit different next week. And so I want to unpack that some with you next week. So we'll do this part as a two-part podcast. So this week and next week we'll do that. And then over the course of the next several months, we'll do a little update. The last time we saw Johnny and Sarah, they were stranded in Nampa, the Boise International Airport. We'll just kind of give updates so that people get the feel of what it's like to go through what you guys are going through. And I sure do appreciate you letting us use you as guinea pigs. It has been a joy walking with you guys over this past year, just sitting down with you, unpacking this. And so I know that as we continue to even ramp it up even more, now we're taking the slingshot, as it were, and we're pulling the rubber band back further and further, getting ready to launch you out.
That sounds even more uncomfortable.
Yeah, that kind of fits with
what we've been
feeling.
Yes, yeah. It's either that or you're the human cannonball.
Right.
And, it's kind of the way we run with things. I had one person tell, I heard one guy preaching at a church recently who had gone through a similar process that you and Sarah have gone through. At least you got the personal touch. I was looking you eye to eye when I upended your world. And this other couple, I upended their world with a 6-sentence email. And now they're serving as missionaries. And he was
your
preaching.
spiritual gift is, huh?
Yeah, it's my gift. And I comfort the afflicted and afflict the comforted. And he was speaking at a church that I happened to be at, and he says, beware of receiving any emails from Jeff Roper.
Right. People should just put a filter. Just send all of your emails into a turn my world upside down box.
Yes, exactly. Yes, God loves you, and I have a wonderful plan for your life. Well, Johnny and Sarah, thank you guys so much for joining us today, and I look forward to picking up the story with you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we're done now. Thanks for listening. This is Jeff Roper reminding you that the mission of God is too grand for mediocrity or average living. You were created for a purpose, and that purpose is found in the mission of God. It's your life. Now go live it.